Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today we are diving into an absolutely incredible medical detective story. We're talking about one of the most transformative medicines in human history, and we're tracing its origins back to a pretty, well, unexpected place. Let's get right into it.
So, you gotta ask yourself, what does a simple blue mold have to do with the world's best-selling heart medicine? I know, it totally sounds like the setup to a bad joke, right? But it's actually the starting point of a high-stakes, real-life scientific mystery. To understand exactly how we got from a random fungus to a life-saving daily medication for millions of us, we need to rewind a few decades.
Part 1. A deadly medical challenge. The 1960s cardiovascular crisis.
Back in the late 1960s, cardiovascular disease was a massive killer worldwide. And look, researchers knew exactly who the culprit was. They'd already established a rock-solid link between elevated LDL, that's low-density lipoprotein, or what we usually call bad cholesterol, and coronary heart disease. But, knowing the enemy and actually fighting it, two completely different things. At the time, doctors just didn't have highly effective drugs to lower cholesterol. The treatments they did have were, well, they were modest at best, and that left patients at a huge risk for heart attacks and strokes. Scientists figured, okay, if we can somehow block the body from producing its own cholesterol, we'd have a massive breakthrough. The catch? Nobody had figured out a safe and effective way to actually stop that production.
Which brings us to Section 2, the unlikely fungal hypothesis. Akira Endo's 1971 breakthrough.
Enter Akira Endo. In 1971, this Japanese microbiologist had a wildly unconventional idea. He hypothesized that fungi, which naturally produce compounds to compete with other microorganisms, might also produce molecules capable of inhibiting HMG-CoA reductase. Basically, Endo realized that fungi out in nature are constantly engaged in this intense chemical warfare just to survive. So he thought, what if somewhere in their biological arsenal there's a natural compound that can shut down HMG-CoA reductase? Because that specific enzyme is the main switch controlling cholesterol synthesis in the human liver.
To test this out, Endo went on an absolute mission of grinding persistence. He and his team painstakingly screened 6,000 fungal extracts. 6,000! For the time, that was an unbelievably huge undertaking. It was literally like looking for a microscopic needle in a giant biological haystack.
But you know what? After years of just relentless research, he actually found it. The molecule is called compactin, or lovastatin. And where did it come from? A strain of Penicillium citrinum. Yep, a blue mold. This was the absolute eureka moment. A humble little blue mold gave us the very first naturally occurring compound ever shown to potently shut down the enzyme responsible for making cholesterol.
All right, let's get into the mechanics of this. Section 3. The innovation in detail. Halting the cholesterol factory.
So to really appreciate this, we need to understand the target itself, HMG-CoA reductase. Think of your liver's cholesterol production like a giant factory assembly line. HMG-CoA reductase is the rate-limiting enzyme. It's basically the master control switch for the entire biosynthesis pathway. If you can manage to flip that one specific switch off, the whole factory just slows right down.
And inside the human body, flipping that switch triggers an amazingly precise cascade of events. Step 1. The statin drug comes in and blocks that HMG-CoA reductase enzyme. Step 2. Because the enzyme is blocked, the liver produces way less cholesterol. Now, step 3 is where the real magic happens. Because the liver cells suddenly find themselves starved of cholesterol, they compensate by ramping up the number of LDL receptors on their surface. Think of these receptors like thousands of tiny vacuums. Which brings us to step 4. Those extra vacuum receptors suck circulating LDL cholesterol straight out of your bloodstream, causing your overall blood LDL, the bad stuff, to plummet. This targeted mechanism is just so brilliant because it's not slapping a band-aid on the symptoms, it's going right to the cellular root cause of the disease.
But it wasn't smooth sailing. Section 4. Setbacks and persistence. The medical mystery deepens.
See, early laboratory and animal studies were looking fantastic. Compactin was dramatically dropping cholesterol levels. But then, disaster struck. During safety studies, researchers saw toxicity in dogs when they used high doses. Now, later on, we'd realized the interpretation of those findings was a bit more nuanced, but at the time, total panic. Development was completely halted. Most pharmaceutical companies just lost their nerve and decided the whole statin concept was way too risky to touch. It really looked like this game-changing biological mechanism was going to be thrown in the trash.
But while everyone else backed away, Merck and company kept digging into the science. Sure, compactin proved the concept, but had those toxicity setbacks. However, by 1978, Merck's researchers isolated another naturally occurring HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor, This one was named lovastatin, and they found it in a totally different fungus called Aspergillus terreus. Lovastatin had the same powerful cholesterol-lowering punch, but, and this is absolutely crucial, it had a much more promising safety profile. Merck's stubborn persistence basically took a dead-end experiment and salvaged the entire concept.
And that leads us to Section 5, the preventative revolution, changing medical history.
From there, it was an absolute sprint to the finish line. Just look at this timeline. From Endo's wild idea about fungal warfare in 1971 to Merck isolating lovastatin in 1978, all the way to the very first patient taking the drug in 1980. That is less than a decade to go from a hypothesis on a whiteboard to a genuine human clinical success.
The results from those 1980 clinical trials were nothing short of mind-blowing. The drug was tolerated really well, and patients saw a sustained drop in their LDL cholesterol of about 30%. For the first time ever, doctors finally had a highly effective tool to knock out bad cholesterol using a targeted, safe mechanism.
But as the massive clinical trials rolled on over the next few years, it became obvious this was way bigger than just lowering a number on a blood test. Lovastatin became the first approved statin, and it actually saved lives. It significantly reduced the real-world risk of heart attacks, strokes, cardiovascular death, and the need for those super-invasive coronary procedures.
This sparked a total paradigm shift in medicine. Instead of just frantically trying to treat a heart attack after the damage was already done, doctors could now actively prevent them from happening in the first place. The era of preventative cardiology was officially here.
Lovastatin's success completely blew the doors open for newer statins like simvastatin, rosuvastatin, and atorvastatin. Just to put the sheer scale of this innovation into perspective for you, atorvastatin became one of the best-selling pharmaceutical products in the history of the world. We're talking lifetime global sales of over $150 billion. Today, these drugs are prescribed to millions of people globally, standing as one of the most effective drug classes we've ever created.
So, what's the big takeaway here? This whole story leaves us with some powerful lessons on innovation. First, breakthrough discoveries can come from the most unlikely natural sources. Seriously, a blue mold. Second, pushing through early setbacks is absolutely critical. Third, if you understand the underlying biology, you can create incredibly targeted, transformative therapies. Fourth, nailing down one single mechanism can birth an entire class of life-saving drugs. And lastly, the highest form of pharmaceutical innovation doesn't just treat a disease, it stops it before it starts.
Which leaves us with one final kind of mind-bending thought to wrap up today's explainer. If an entire revolution in preventative medicine was just chilling there in ordinary fungi, what other life-saving breakthroughs is nature still waiting for us to find? It definitely makes you look at the natural world a little bit differently, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible medical journey, and I will see you all in the next explainer.